The town of Ashwood, Pennsylvania, had always carried an air of quiet mystery, but nothing stirred the imagination or the fear like Blackthorn Woods. Generations of locals spoke of shadowy figures glimpsed between the trees, of children lured by whispers only to vanish without a trace, and of a darkness that seemed to grow deeper with each passing year. They didn't need warnings. Blackthorn Woods wasn't just cursed, it was alive. Sarah and her friends had heard these tales countless times. Just folklore, she told herself, though her voice faltered when she said it aloud. A journalist in search of a story, Sarah had dragged her friends, James the skeptic, Emily the dreamer, and Mark the restless adventurer, into what she believed was nothing more than a forest with a reputation for bad luck. "We'll be fine," she assured them, ignoring the cold knot forming in her stomach. The forest greeted them with an unnatural stillness. Trees towered overhead, their twisted branches blocking the sun, leaving the ground bathed in a perpetual gray light. The air felt heavy, damp with a scent of decay that clung to their clothes. Emily shivered. "It feels like we're being watched," she whispered. No one laughed. Their first day in the woods was uneventful, save for the strange symbols they began to notice etched into the trees. Circles, jagged lines, and symbols none of them could identify seemed to follow them along the trail. Sarah took pictures, but when she checked them later, the symbols appeared blurred, as if they refused to be captured. Nightfall brought a new kind of unease. The group huddled around a small fire, its light barely pushing back the encroaching darkness. As they talked, the forest seemed to close in, the shadows stretching long and sharp. It started with a faint sound, a distant whisper that seemed to float on the breeze. "Did you hear that?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. The whispers grew louder, more distinct. It wasn't the wind. It was voices, low and mournful, weaving through the trees. Then they began to call their names. "Sarah." The sound came from nowhere and everywhere, as if the forest itself was speaking. "Don't answer it," Mark said firmly, his bravado cracking. James, ever the skeptic, scoffed. "It's just the wind," he said, grabbing his flashlight. "I'll prove it." Before anyone could stop him, he disappeared into the trees. His flashlight bobbed in the distance until it vanished entirely. Moments later, his scream tore through the air, raw and primal. They ran toward the sound but found only his flashlight, its beam illuminating deep gouges in the earth. Panic set in as they realized they were no longer on the trail. The forest seemed to shift around them, paths twisting and doubling back. Sarah's compass spun wildly, and the symbols on the trees seemed to multiply, growing more elaborate and sinister. The whispers never stopped, growing louder with each step. On the second night, the group decided to take turns keeping watch, but exhaustion claimed them all. Sarah awoke to find Mark standing at the edge of the campsite, staring into the trees. "Mark?" she called softly. He didn't respond. When she approached, he turned to her, his eyes wide with terror. "I saw something," he whispered. "It was watching us." By morning, Mark was gone. His tent was shredded, and his gear was scattered across the clearing. A trail of blood led deeper into the woods, but no one dared to follow it. Emily broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. "We're going to die here," she whimpered. Sarah tried to comfort her, but the growing dread in her chest made it impossible. That night, the whispers grew louder, now joined by faint laughter, high-pitched and mocking. Emily began to mutter to herself, her eyes darting to unseen shapes in the dark. Suddenly, she stood up and screamed, "I can't take it anymore," before running into the woods. Sarah chased after her, but all she found was Emily's scarf, tangled in the branches of a tree that looked as though it had been clawed open. Now alone, Sarah wandered aimlessly, her thoughts unraveling as the whispers turned into screams. She stumbled upon a clearing where an ancient altar stood. It was covered in bloodstains, the symbols carved into it glowing faintly in the moonlight. On the altar lay a book, its pages filled with cryptic writing. As she touched it, a deep, guttural growl echoed around her. The ground trembled, and shadows emerged from the trees, their forms shifting and flickering. Hollow eyes stared at her from every direction, and a voice, low and inhuman, spoke from the darkness. "You don't belong here." Desperation overtook her. She began to recite the incantation written in the book, hoping it would save her. The forest erupted in chaos. Trees groaned as if in pain, the ground split open and the shadows closed in. Sarah screamed, her voice joining the cacophony of whispers as the darkness consumed her. Weeks later, a search party found only remnants of the group's campsite. Sarah's journal lay beneath a tree marked with fresh claw marks. Its final entry read, "The forest is alive. It sees everything. It will never let you go." To this day, Blackthorn Woods remains untouched. The locals warn anyone who dares to approach. If you hear your name in the wind, they say, don't answer. Once the forest knows you, it will never forget.